All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Joe, he's Nick, and you are listening to the Nook and Joe Show, hour number 2, segment number 3, episode 129. And I hear Nick laughing in the background there. I'm not entirely sure why, but did I say something funny?
Yeah, you did. You said the Nook and Joe Show.
I did not. Did I really? I'll have to go back and listen to it.
Yeah, you did.
Okay, well, I didn't mean to call you a Nook. The Nick and Joe Show.
That's not, it's just the way it came out. It was, welcome back to the Nook and Joe Show. I'm thinking, oh, okay.
We aren't even drinking, Nick.
Anyway, all right.
Oh, dear.
Oh, trust me, I wouldn't do that to our listeners because that would be far too much fun for their benefit. I wouldn't want to overload their giggle circuits.
Okay. Anyway, quick housekeeping. Again, welcome back if you're listening to, well, whether you're listening to the live show or the podcast of the live show, welcome back. But it's Monday morning, segment number 3, if you're listening to the podcast. If you're listening to the live show, well, it's still Wednesday night, and it's hour number 2. And for those of you on the live show that want to participate in the chat room, click on the chat bubble, and it will take you to, you'll have to log in, or you may have to register, and that is just to ensure that you're a real, honest-to-goodness, flesh and blood human being. So there you have it,
All
Nick.
right.
There you have it.
Yes.
And we're just
there you have it.
We're having a lot of, I don't know, this is, I don't know if we've just been too intellectual over the past hour, Nick, the past 2 segments, talking about government and some...
Well, we're going to put the boots to that.
What, you mean we're not going to be smart and intellectual anymore?
Yeah, well, we're not going to let that illusion hang around very long.
Okay.
No. It's too much fun having fun. That's why I could never be an intellectual. They take themselves too seriously. Anyway, at least the few that I know. One of the questions I have is, I've been watching everything from COVID to new bills coming down the pike with this political party here in Ontario known as the Conservative Party of, what do they call it? The
Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario.
Ontario, yeah.
PCPO.
Because PCPO, okay, because I'm confused with the CPC, which is the Conservative Party of Canada.
Right.
Now, you could ask this question across the board, but I want to focus more on Ontario because I think the sins here are more egregious in our province than it is at the country level, although that's not a very high standard. Just exactly how conservative is the Doug Ford government? If you look at their handling of the COVID crisis as an example, I don't want to get into that, but just keep that in the back of your mind. Then you look at things like this Bill C-213 that's coming down the pike. And I'll get you to explain what it is about that we have problems with. To just, there's a whole tenor here that's wrong, that doesn't blend or harmonize with what conservatives consider being conservative. Like, what government program have they ended? What department have they shut down? What taxes have they lowered? These kinds of things. Smaller government, less taxes, more personal responsibility, more freedom for the individual. These things, the hallmarks of being a conservative, I don't see them doing any of these things. Never mind not enough of them. I don't see any of it. So just exactly how conservative, how blue is the flag on top of Queen's Park right now?
Well, I think that's a very good question. I think it's an excellent question. I think it's a fair question to ask. Look, I know we don't want to talk about this COVID-19 stuff. We're not going to, except to say that in fairness to the government, to the Ford government, they've had to deal with this particular problem. And again, for new listeners, okay, if you've just joined us, that pounding in the background is Nick pounding away furiously because he's a furious pounder. And when his blood pressure gets up on this show, he just takes it out on his computer. And that's what you hear in the background. He's just he's just pounding away on his keypad on his laptop. And he gets furious because he thinks that I'm going to defend the current government. I'm going to defend their pseudo-liberal or quasi-liberal policies. And Nick, I'm not. I'm not going to defend the government. I'm just saying, let's just bear in mind, in terms of how long it takes them to actually implement conservative policy, that they have had to deal with this whole COVID-19 issue. And I think that all governments across the country, and indeed in the Western world, and perhaps around the world altogether, that are heavily involved in the welfare of their populations, are struggling right now with, what the correct response is. I don't think that necessarily the government here in Ontario has had the correct responses, but that's a separate debate, and I don't really want to get into that right now. The bigger question is whether or not, in the absence of this COVID-19 outbreak that we're dealing with, whether or not this government actually would have followed through with policies and a program that could realistically be described as conservative. And that's where I think I draw the line on supporting them. I would give them maybe a B minus on the COVID response at first. My opinion is sinking slowly, and that slow sinking is going to start accelerating soon if they keep it up what they've been doing lately. But I don't really believe that these guys were going to follow through on anything that you've just talked about, Nick. Lowering taxes, cutting regulations, cutting red tape, maybe shrinking the size of government, cutting spending significantly. I didn't see any of that in their behavior after getting elected, prior to the health crisis that we're dealing with right now. So I just don't think it's in their DNA. And I'm sufficiently connected with backbenchers through either directly or indirectly through whatever the process is, because, I work professionally in conservative politics, not working directly for any particular conservative party, but I'm a conservative, and this is how I deal with policy and what have you, and advocacy from a conservative perspective. So I'm aware that there's a lot of dissatisfaction in the conservative backbenches with the direction that this government has gone in so many areas. And I'm going to go right to the whole question of what started it off was whether or not this government was going to make significant changes to the details of the sex ed curriculum that was part of the health and physical education curriculum for the public schools. And in the end, they really caved a lot in that area. And to me, that was a serious problem, because that was an important plank in their platform for a particular constituency. So that when they basically broke their promise to social conservatives on that was a sign that they weren't really going to follow through on possibly a lot of their policies. So look, the bottom line here is, I don't think they're very conservative. I'm not particularly shocked by it. What does surprise me, I think, Nick, is the degree to which backbenchers, again, this is the topic we were on to, a theme we were exploring in the last couple of segments of the show, and that is the whole idea of whether backbenchers are going to hold the leadership of their party accountable for bringing the party and bringing the government in a direction that is fundamentally inconsistent with the principles that they were elected to govern by. I think that's the real question here. And Nick, over to you.
Well, the question is, tell us what's in it that causes you problems, because I think we both agree in general it's an omnibus bill that does a lot of house cleaning, but there are several things in it that make you really scratch your head and say, what the devil is that doing in there?
Well,
like, how does this fit into any government mandate in the first place?
Well, there are a lot of things, if you're quite right, Bill 213, that there's 213 that's before the government right now, before the Ontario legislature right now, Nick. You're right. There are a number of issues in it that, some people could quibble about, etc. But the one thing from a conservative perspective that really jumps out at me, and that I, as you say, I'm scratching my head about, is a proposed amendment to the Marriage Act in Ontario that would empower the minister to establish a code of conduct for those who are licensed in the province of Ontario to solemnize marriages. So we'll call them marriage commissioners, for want of a better term. And it gives the minister not only the power to create this code of conduct, but to enforce it. In other words, to say, if anyone violates this code of conduct, then, you're going to lose your license to solemnize marriages. And I'm scratching my head. There are two problems with that. I think that's a problem, well, maybe three. The first is it's a problem in principle right from the word go. I don't see that the government should be establishing a code of behavior for marriage counselors or for those individuals licensed to carry out, to solemnize marriages. I mean, I don't think in principle that the government should have any say in that. Let's be clear, the government actually does actually have a say. I mean, let's take the most egregious example that you can think of is, let's say, a priest, and I don't want to say anything that's going to be misconstrued as being anti-Catholic here, but let's say you have a priest who has been guilty of sexual misconduct, let's say, and that priest is defrocked or whatever, okay, or maybe he's not defrocked, but he's convicted. He's accused, he's convicted. Whatever the response of the Catholic Church is, the government has the ability to revoke the license of this particular priest already to solemnize marriages. So there's no need to create a code of conduct and then empower explicitly the minister to enforce that code of conduct. So that's the first thing. In principle, I don't think it's necessary. But necessary or not, all of this raises the question of who is demanding this. Like, this is not a simple housekeeping item. This is not a question of just modernizing the language of a particular act, which is what, a number of these amendments to various acts that's included in this bill is all about. Okay, that's normal housekeeping stuff, happens all the time. I don't understand who is demanding this creation of a code of conduct, and I note that there is no information that's provided in the